Hi, everyone. This is Sal Albanese, and welcome to my podcast, Running Against the Wind. I have another great guest today, and we'll be discussing one of the most pressing issues facing the city and the state, and maybe the country, but certainly New York City. When we talk about affordability, it's basically about three words: housing, 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 and how it's become so difficult to live in New York City. And Cea Weaver has been a strong advocate, probably one of the most outspoken and knowledgeable people about this topic in the city and in the state. And I look forward to sharing her information with all of you and her feedback. Before I start asking Cea a question about this, let me give you a quick overview of my background. I came here as an immigrant at the age of 8, and my mother supported us on a government worker's salary. My dad was disabled, and we lived in Park Slope in railroad rooms back in the 60s, and we would have been homeless today. We were paying about $35 a month in rent, which is, in those days, was reasonable, and we were able to afford it. It wasn't, nirvana, but it was a home, right? And it it really I kind of focus on how things have changed in the city since the 60s, right? Where the city was somewhat affordable in those days. I also taught for 11 years in the New York City Public Schools from 1982 to 1997. And I taught in really poor areas of the city. And we didn't have any homeless kids in those days. Now we have 100,000 homeless kids in our school system. So I think that tells you a lot about what's going on in this town and how it's progressed over the years. That where people are homeless, they're being driven out of working class, middle class people, poor people are being driven out of the city because of this affordability crisis. On the city council, I voted against vacancy decontrol when the landlord lobby bribed the city council and passed it. And I predicted that we would lose tens of thousands of affordable units in the city. And unfortunately, I was right. This is something that's close to my own experience and heart, this whole affordability crisis. When I ran for mayor in 97, my theme was A Tale of Two Cities. That was 97. Now, right now we're in 2025, and it's significantly worse. I was proud of the fact that I voted against vacancy decontrol. I passed the city's first living wage law. And so that this whole issue is so important to the city, to the future of the city. And that we see that with Zoe Mondani's campaign, how he's picked up tremendous support over the issue of affordability, which every politician in the country should actually follow suit. Cea, what's your background? How did you get involved in this very important issue?
Thanks for asking, and thanks for sharing some of your background. And I could not agree more about how out of control this crisis has gotten here in the city. I grew up in Rochester, New York, which, for those of you who don't know Rochester, it is an extraordinarily segregated post-industrial city up in upstate New York. It's on like Lake Ontario, and I went to public schools in Rochester. The public schools are themselves, Rochester is a plurality Black city. But the public schools are really segregated. The housing market is really segregated. And I grew up knowing that the housing market was driving a lot of the inequality and the poverty that was around me in Rochester. Um, I got interested in politics, organizing with students in my high school and my middle school around going to war in Iraq, and opposing that. And then as many people of my generation, and that sort of is how I got interested in politics and paying attention to the politics in the world. And then I went to college and graduated from college around the time of the foreclosure crisis.
Where'd
So
you go?
when I
What
I went
school?
to I went to Bryn Mawr College. It's outside of
Oh,
Philadelphia.
it's a great school.
Yeah, I got a great education. I was very lucky to have that. And I moved to New York City and I started organizing tenants mostly in multifamily buildings that were facing foreclosure. So the landlord had largely overleveraged the buildings and couldn't pay back their mortgage. But before they stopped paying their banks and their investors, they had stopped making repairs. They had tried to evict people in order to raise the rents. They had maybe fired supers or managers. And so by the time a building gets to foreclosure, it's an extraordinarily bad physical condition because the landlord will, the bank, just like the rent eats first, the mortgage eats first, the investors eats first. And so that means that the landlord had already tried to do as much as they could to jack up the rent. Um, so I was working in buildings that were in extraordinarily bad conditions. And what I was doing at the time, I was working on an organization that's near and dear to my heart called the Urban Homesteading Assistance Board, UHAB, which works to form tenants associations and then support tenants associations and taking over their buildings and converting them to shared equity co-ops. UHAB has done that in distressed housing in New York City since the 1970s and has created some of the, um, I don't know, most durable, permanently affordable shared equity, limited equity cooperatives that we see all over our neighborhood. So um, that really got me thinking at the very beginning of my career doing tenant organizing about the relationship between lenders, landlords, real estate speculation, neighborhoods, and city government. Yeah, so that's how I got into this work. Um, and it's been a wild ride since then.
Yeah, well, you're doing God's work. I mean, I was elected to the city council in '82, and I did a lot of tenant organizing in Bay Ridge. So there were
Amazing.
a lot of buildings that were like falling apart. There were rodents and all kinds of stuff, and the landlords were just being neglectful. So we applied the full court press there against some landlords. But at that time, also there was the co-op conversion stuff going on.
Yeah.
No, which is also caused a lot of issues. Now, you were you were the executive director of Housing Justice for All. Are you still is that or you have Tenant Bloc now? What is? Tell me about the
Yeah.
organizations.
So Housing Justice for All. So yeah, we founded Housing Justice for All in 2017, and our goal in that moment was, as you know, you're like very familiar, the sort of history of rent stabilization in New York, and the IDC and the political dynamics. Our goal with Housing Justice for All was to organize renters across New York State in order to be ready for 2019, the moment that rent stabilization laws in Albany were going to sunset, and we wanted to be able to intervene across New York. We knew for like years and years and years that the real estate industry was able to flip upstate New York Democrats to vote against rent stabilization reforms because if you're an upstate New York Democrat, it's no skin off your back.
Yep.
You get a $5,000 check from a New York City landlord. You're not hurting your constituents at all.
Yep.
And so we thought that the politics really required that we build at a statewide level. Um,
How'd you do that?
so
I mean, because you're right. There's, upstate has a whole different, dynamic than the city. Uh,
yeah, um, two things were really important. The first thing is that we needed to expand our platform to cover issues that mattered to renters in upstate New York. And the two things that we did were we put a bill on our platform that we then were able to win in 2019. I'm very proud of it. That expands rent stabilization to the whole state. And the second thing we put on our platform was good cause eviction. We have now won both of those things. Good cause eviction provide basic rights against price gouging and the right to maintain your tenancy to all tenants, regardless of whether or not you're unstabilized, with some notable exceptions, unfortunately. But many tenants in New York now benefit from good cause eviction protections. And then rent stabilization, as you know from your time on the city council, is an opt-in. Municipalities opt in to rent stabilization. So we passed a law in Albany. Municipalities choose to participate. There's about 25 municipalities in New York State that participate. New York City, of course, is the biggest. But yeah, we passed enabling legislation that would allow cities like Rochester, Buffalo, Syracuse, Albany, and so on to also participate in rent stabilization.
Now,
Um,
go ahead.
so that's the first thing. That's the first thing we need to do to build a coalition is expand the platform and not be on the defensive. The second thing is it required just a tremendous amount of trust building. And I put a lot of miles on my car in 2017 and 2018, um, and drove around the state. I brought tenants from New York City to my hometown in Rochester and introduced them to tenants in Rochester. A lot of shared exchanges. There's a slumlord who owns, about 200 apartments in Rochester, New York, who treats tenants very badly there. And he happens to have an office in New York City and live and work in New York City. So we were able to, you know, do like demand letter deliveries with New York City renters in solidarity with renters in upstate. So we did actions in those few years that would like help us get to know each other and really like identify our shared resources and our shared
That
interests.
that's amazing. How is the crisis uh, up in cities like Rochester, Buffalo, and just upstate in general uh, similar to New York City in terms of affordability, or is that, or obviously it's probably cheaper, right, to
It's
live?
cheaper, but wages are lower. And you have these, similar to New York, you have pockets of really intense gentrification and pockets of really intense physical disrepair. And so those are like the two things that are happening is rents are going up extraordinarily quickly, wages are pretty stagnant, and housing quality is poor. And that is that is true everywhere. The dynamics, of course, are unique in every single place. There is in Rochester and Buffalo and Syracuse, your major employer is the university. And so you have a lot of students who are coming in and leaving. It's like there's like the dynamics of a major university being the big driver economically, and that impacts the housing market that are unique and New York City doesn't really have. But in general, tenants are experiencing similar things.
Interesting. And so you were able to put that coalition together across the state, and you were able to reverse vacancy decontrol, right?
Yes, I'm very proud of that.
Landlords are not happy with you. Um, I've endorsed Joanne Mamdani. I'm a fan. Um, have you been advising the campaign or the policy team on these affordability issues when it comes to housing?
Well, so the Tenant Bloc is the sister organization C4 to Housing Justice for All. So that's where we do our political work. Uh, and like explicit political endorsements and get involved in elections. And so I was really proud that our first ever endorsement as the Tenant Bloc was to endorse Ron for mayor. And we worked closely with him and his campaign team to make sure that he was talking to renters about things that they cared about. And, I think that the call for a rent freeze is really important because it both speaks to affordability, but it speaks to something that New Yorkers know the mayor can do. The long history of rent stabilization has meant that rent stabilized tenants all over the city, and it's, 40% of the city, it's pretty significant.
That's
They are paying attention.
yeah. How many
And
is it? Over a million, 2 million people live in rent stabilized apartments.
it's about 2.5 million people live across 900,000 or so apartments. Yeah.
It's amazing.
It's amazing. It's the biggest driver of affordability in our city by far. I think it's important to understand it as a consumer protection. It's not a housing affordability program. It's a consumer protection in a city that has a very tight housing market. And New Yorkers know, they are very savvy. New York renters are very savvy, and they are expecting their rent stabilized lease. And they know that the mayor is in control of the rent guidelines board. They go every year. I think of the RGB as a place where landlords and tenants sort of sectorally bargain. The theater of it is the point, right?
Yes,
The theater of it is getting on News 12 every day. It's getting in people's living rooms. It's getting in people's minds. And that political theater that some people think is a waste of time is actually providing a tremendous public service
Yeah.
to make sure people know what their rights are. And yeah, so Duran running on rent stabilization is and running on a rent freeze was so important because we've all heard politicians say a million times, like, I'm going to build affordable housing here. I'm going to build affordable housing there. And I don't want to discount how important that is,
Yeah.
but New Yorkers just do not believe it. And so Duran was like, I'm going to deliver something that you know and I know I can do. And I think that's really important.
Well, it's obviously it helped to elevate um, his candidacy because people are feeling the pinch out there, and they're looking forward to somebody to champion tenants. I testified before that rent guidelines board numerous times. It's always been a trip, you know.
It is. It's a trip.
uh, let me,
I do think that the members of the RGB are not paid enough. Let me tell you that. You
yeah,
know, if you're on the city planning commission, you're getting like 60K a year and a pension. If you're on the
really,
RGB, you're getting like $100 a meeting. It's just not
to
fair.
give you, let me. How do you respond to the uh, um the rent guidelines board objective criteria every year, which says uh, the insurance is going up, utilities are higher, and the rents have to increase, commensurate with objective criteria. How do you deal with that?
Yeah. Well, I think two things can be true at the same time. The first is that landlord costs are certainly going up. And I think it does not behoove us to be dishonest about that. The cost of insurance is rising. The cost of, the hard materials is rising. Some tariffs are going to drive up the price. Trump's tariffs are going to drive up the price of wood
Yeah,
by 15% or something like that. The things that you need to maintain your building, those costs are going up. At the same time, we need the rent guidelines board to also look at the impact, not just on the physical quality of the buildings and on the landlord's incomes, but also on the ability of renters to pay. The problem is that renters cannot pay an increase. And if renters cannot pay an increase, the difference between a 0%, a 1%, a 2% is sort of a moot point. We can't afford it. And we actually need solutions that control costs for the industry and control costs for renters because that's just this type of emergency that we're in. Um, I think the other thing that I really like when I look at the history of housing policy in New York City, you look at programs like the Mitchell-Lama program, and the Mitchell-Lama program I think was tremendous for many reasons, but
yeah,
one of the things that was so tremendous about it is that it said to the industry, we are going to guarantee a profit. That profit is 6%. We're not going to guarantee more than it, and we're not going to guarantee less either. And everything over that 6% profit is going back into the state's coffers to build more Mitchell-Lama. And that's what we don't have anymore. So landlords are paying themselves quite a lot, expecting sort of private equity level returns out of rent stabilized buildings,
yeah,
which, I believe that landlords should be making a profit here and the profit should be commensurate with like a treasury bond or like, it's like a
yeah.
5 to 6% return on real estate, not like a finance Wall Street level return on real estate. And if your expectation is that, rent stabilization is not the investment for you.
Right. No, that's absolutely correct. I'm a big fan of Mitchell-Lama. In my council district, I had the Bay Ridge Towers, two big towers, and I interacted with the tenants there on a regular basis. There was a great buildings. People were happy generally. There's always complaints, but it was. I was kind of shocked that they eliminated that program. Is that one of the solutions here to get to make the city more affordable and build more housing or restore the Mitchell-Lama program? Could that be done?
I think, well, yes, restoring the Mitchell-Lama program certainly could be done. I think we should learn from the mistakes of the past and that, you know, on the rental side, the Mitchell-Lamas were allowed to expire and not all of them went into rent stabilization. And so some of them now are, um, too many of the Mitchell-Lama rentals left the program at the end of the mortgage term. And HPD has learned, the Housing Preservation Development has learned a lot since the Mitchell-Lama program about how to ensure that at the end of a mortgage term, the landlord comes back to the table with the city and the affordability is extended. So I think we've learned a lot since the 70s about how to ensure that the investments that we make in affordable housing continue in perpetuity. Um, the second thing I would change about the Mitchell-Lama program is that some of the co-ops are now carrying a tremendous amount of backlog maintenance and repair needs. And so I think we need to take a closer look on what the Mitchell-Lamas require so that, you don't have the perennial situation where 15 years with no increases and then a sudden hike, 15 years with no increase and then a sudden hike. So if we were to redo the Mitchell-Lama program, I think the things that we would want to preserve really are the limits on the profit to the private landlord, and investment back into something that looks like more of a revolving loan fund. So that sort of model of the public benefiting from the value of the real estate investment is really critically important, and the limiting of the profit is really important. But reforms, given what we know now about how these things tend to go.
Yeah, I mean, the idea that there should be private equity-like returns for these investors and affordable housing is ludicrous. It's just not. You've got all these LLCs too. You got all these little investors in there. Used to in the old days. The landlord used to right in Park Slope, where my mother and my family lived. The landlord lived in a building. She was she was there, and now you got all these folks with these LLCs that are investing, tons of money and are expecting 20%, in profits. It's
Right.
I mean, this is housing. This is not. I mean, I like your assessment that it should be like a treasury bond kind of thing. I think that makes a lot of sense. Of course, the landlords, the investors won't like that. Now, what can the city do for the landlord through transparency? Right, doesn't have
Mhm.
the resources to properly maintain the building. What can the city do to help them?
Yeah,
And transparency is important. How do you achieve that transparency? How do we know that the landlord's telling the truth?
I know.
How do
Yeah.
we do that?
um, somebody said something to me recently uh, that was along the lines of the sort of rule of thumb in American politics is that the loser is the one who has to open their books. So we have so many programs that require tenants to submit all this information about their paper, their background and their eligibility, and they have to go down to HPD once a year and sit in an over air conditioned room and watch a video about how to be a good tenant in order to get access to Section 8, and then Section 8 goes, so like all of these programs that create a lot of hoops for renters to get
Mhm.
access to rental assistance.
Right.
I think that those could stand to be reformed on the one hand, so that more tenants are able to easily access resources to help them pay the rent, and that will help landlords too. The other thing is that, you know, landlords should have to open their books too. I
No,
think that landlords going down to City Hall or HPD and opening up their books and saying, "Look, like I can't handle it. I need some support." There are programs at HPD that allow for that, but unfortunately, the processes are all sort of gummed up. I think we could do like a whole, I'm hoping that Zran will be able to do a sort of a whole audit about what we need to do to get money moving out of HPD again. Under Adams, the agency has struggled to retain staff. HPD public servants are not paid enough to for the level of importance that their job is. It's taking too long for landlords to get access to project managers who are going to help them get access to city loans. So there's a lot of things that we can do that are just about making government work better,
yes.
and making it work better for both the landlords and the renters, who are both required for the housing quality to be high.
I assume that the landlord lobbies and the real estate lobby. I mean, you had some amazing wins. I mean, real estate lobby had basically free reign over Albany. And they part of the reason why I think these things are all gummed up is because of obviously the influence of big landlords in the city. You're too young to remember this, but there was an assemblyman called John Deere. John Deere. He's still around. He's not an assemblyman anymore, but his big issue was to have landlords open their books, right? And of
Uh-huh.
course, the bill never made it out of Albany, but that's something that I mean that should be done, and it could be done.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, uh, so in your from your perspective, what are the top priorities to making housing more affordable in the city? What are the top three things that we need to do? Rent freeze is one, I guess, that you're.
Rent freeze is important. Certainly, I think the rent freeze is critically important. The next thing that I think we need to do is we need to make it easier to build truly affordable housing. And we need to make sure that that housing that we build is maintained in the public sector. And so that profit needs to be shared with the real estate industry and the city itself so that the city can then go and build more truly affordable housing. Um, so I think that sort of pivot to a more sort of public sector, private sector shared equity approach is important. These developer fees that they are negotiating with the city to build on public land or have gotten a little bit out of control. So we need to get that back under control. The profit expectation.
Yeah, NYCHA, they're doing that over at NYCHA, right? They're
They
allowed.
are. Mhm.
I'm always suspicious of that because eventually they'll want to eliminate NYCHA, and take over all those. I hate to be skeptical, but I've seen the MO over the years. Uh,
Mhm.
I was I was a big fan of the Industrial Areas Foundation,
Oh
EBC.
yeah,
You know,
they
I
really can move. They really can move people.
well,
They're very impressive.
I was actually there's a book by Michael Geekin, who's their executive director, called Going Public, and I'm in the book because I was a prime sponsor of the living wage law, but I could not have gotten it done without Reverend Youngblood and Bishop McGovern and all the churches that were
Yeah,
passed that bill. But I was also impressed during the Koch administration. They built these homes in East New York, thousands
Nehemiah houses, right?
firehouses. I mean, I was there when they opened them up, but the city allowed, they donated the land and the infrastructure, and nonprofit developers built those homes, and mostly working people bought them, right? Folks who were not even in the middle class, and that's
Mhm.
an amazing thing. I'm hoping that. I'm hoping that Zorian works closely with those folks because they can be very very helpful. They're tough. They're tough.
They're tough.
They will come at you. I've been I've been to a number of meetings with them on where they have elected officials and police officials on the stage, and they get grilled, but they get results, right? Reverend Brawley is in charge of that. Youngblood is no longer the head of it, but Brawley's very good. So I'm hoping that Zoran works with them. Have you done any work with them, Sia?
Yeah, I find them extremely impressive. I think, like I said, their ability to just turn out large number of people to participate in public pressure campaigns is pretty unparalleled in the city. Um, and I'm very impressed. Yeah, I've enjoyed getting to know them.
Well, yeah, they're. I mean, I just love their MO, and they've done a lot of great things in the city.
They're really rigorous. They are really rigorous organizers, and they have a methodology, and it works, and they use it, and they stay focused.
Yes,
It's really good.
do you know Michael Geekin? He's their like top advisor. He's great. He's fantastic.
I
He
don't know him, but I know the book that you're talking about.
yes, yes. I'm in that book, by the way. Look it up, and you'll see.
Okay. I'll look at the.
And it was Rudy
I'll
Giuliani.
check the. I'll
We
check
over,
the index.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. We overrode Giuliani's veto. He didn't want the living wage bill, and we were able to get it done. But
What impressive.
yeah, yeah.
There, people are not always willing to override a veto.
No, no, absolutely not. And we were it was the second living wage law in the country. Number one, Baltimore passed it with IAF doing it. And I testified in Chicago, Philadelphia, as they were entertaining that law as well. But my point is, when it comes to affordability, there has to be a building of coalitions. And I think IAF, Industrial Areas Foundation, and the churches could be a major, major player because they're watching their congregations basically leave the city. They can't stay here anymore. They're mostly working
Is
people.
this?
teachers, nurses, people who don't make. I mean, teachers and nurses do okay, but there's a lot of folks in the city who work and just don't make enough money to survive here, and that's why I think that they could really help Zoran. Um, if you're offered a position in the Zoran administration, would you consider it?
I don't know. I can't say anything like that.
No, I know, but I know you can't answer. I'll just throw it out there. But if he's smart, he'll make you a major player in his housing. Well, affordability is all about housing. I mean, I love the fact that the daycare stuff is also very good. That's very impressive. That's
Yeah,
going to cost.
it's really impressive. And I mean, some of the things that like some of the thing I love that I love the sort of like rigorous focus that John brings to the many ways and that New York has become unaffordable for the so many working class people who live here. And one of the things I think about housing and that I think you're speaking to too is that, you can't make the housing market do everything. And the problem with so much public policy is that we're trying to make the housing market do everything. If you want to pay for childcare, you better become a homeowner. If you want to pay for end of life care, you better become a homeowner. If you want to pay for your kids to go to college. I mean, my parents were able to pay for me to go to college because they took home equity out and then I went to college. It's not a sustainable political or social system if our housing market is expected to be our entire social safety net. And it's certainly not sustainable in a city like New York, which is 70% renter.
Yeah,
So I think that Zoran's laser focus on affordability has identified a problem with our housing market as like an underlying driver of a sort of very patchy and Swiss cheese social safety net that we have in America.
yeah. Well, he's going to uh, what Jorian's affordability agenda is great. I think that's one of the reasons why. Besides the fact that he's very charismatic, he's.
Yeah, he is. He's
I
talented.
told,
He's a
I
talented
told
guy.
I told I told him I was jealous because I ran for mayor on the affordability platform, and I just didn't have his charisma or his ability to generate that much interest. Of course, I was kidding with him, but the guy,
Well, you need both. You need the platform and
yeah,
you need people to believe in you.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
at the end of the day, it is a popularity contest.
yeah. I mean, he has great people skills. His challenge, and I've told him this, will be enlisting the right personnel, attracting. At the end of the day, it's about execution, right? And you need people that are competent, that are honest, uh, to get these things done. I've seen great ideas just go by the wayside because the personnel, the people that were hired to do the job, just didn't do the job for
Yeah.
whatever. They didn't have the skill level. They were lazy, whatever. So that's going to be his challenge. I mean, I think that they're doing a lot of work around policy. His team is, and they're looking at folks. They haven't made obviously no commitments to personnel, but I think after the election, which I think is going to prevail, that they're going to have to hit the ground running. They're going to have to really because he he has a lot of people, he has a lot of enemies, folks that are looking to sink him, right? They want to sink the progressive agenda. He's a socialist, all of that stuff. So people like you around him and others that are skilled are going to be very important to him. One
Yeah.
last, yeah, one last point. Albany, how do you guys manage? I mean, that place. I mean, I'm a big pay to play has really been a disaster for the city and the state. I mean, Cuomo raising all this money from developers, and Adams doing the same thing, and De Blasio was doing the same thing. And how did how did the culture change up there? They're more receptive to affordability issues. How did
Yes.
that happen?
Um, yes. Great question. Well, to the first point, just before we go to Albany, I think another thing that Zran's going to have to do, and I think there's like a huge amount of really excellent public servants who work for the city of New York who are extraordinarily demoralized after the last 4 years of
Yeah,
their work being called into question by a mayor who isn't treating the job with the respect that it deserves and the the unrelenting corruption,
Yeah.
petty corruption. And so I think part of what I think Zoran's charisma will bring him is, public sector workers who are excited to go to work. That's so important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, on the Albany front, I think it's actually sort of similar. Um, Albany, well, when we started Housing Justice for All in 2017 and 2018, and then we started in 2018, we started talking to through, our relationship with the good people over at the New York Working Families Party and folks in New York City DSA, um, Cynthia Nixon running for governor, we were starting to do conversations about the role that the real estate industry played in politics. And we were, I think, helped by the fact that that time, 2018, was this moment of a tremendous progressive upsurge and people paying attention. Trump had just been elected. And so we had indivisible groups all over the city who were eager to take action to stop Trump Democrats. So Albany at the time was controlled by the IDC, a group that Andrew Cuomo empowered, right? Andrew Cuomo really empowered the IDC.
Sure did.
And so we were able to change the culture in Albany by bringing the issue of rent and rent stabilization to these progressive movements in 2018. New York Working Families Party, Indivisible, who was, at the end of the day, Donald Trump is a New York City real estate developer. And we could go to people in this moment, newly politicized activists who were furious about the results of the White House in 2017 and say, if you want to stop real estate developers, you want to stop Trump, we got to take out the IDC. And so we elected people to office on a pledge to not accept money from Trump and his friends, like the
Yeah.
real estate developer friends, and really shifted the dynamics in the New York State Senate pretty tremendously. Then what we were able to do is we encouraged all session. We encouraged Leader Stuart Cousins and Speaker Hasty to do the rent deal without Andrew Cuomo. They are legislators. They can lead. They are equally important to the way that the New York State government functions as a governor. And so it was really their rent regulation package. And Andrew Cuomo saw the bill when it landed on his desk after they had passed it, and they called the question: Are you going to veto this and cause millions of people to lose their homes, or are we going to let it go forward? And so I think it's that combination of um, bringing activism into Albany during this moment of upsurge, electing out the IDC and staying laser focused on the fact that elections matter, and then, strong leadership in the legislative body that's committed to working with outside movement. And that's how we were able to do it. And
It's amazing.
we need to keep it up, though. There's no resting on your laurels in politics.
Well, absolutely, because money still talks in this state. I mean, I'm a big believer in campaign finance reform.
Yeah.
I told Zoran there are two things he should do to mitigate pay to play in New York City. One is to stop lobbyists from bundling money, people who do business with the city from bundling money, which is outrageous,
Yeah.
by the way.
It's outrageous. It's
Uh,
outrageous.
and hopefully he'll follow through. He can do that very easily. He can do that very easily, and I'm hoping that he follows through because corruption, is rampant in New York. We're allegedly a progressive state. That's not
It's
true.
bad.
It's nonsense. I mean, we have a broken political system. And money is one of the major problems. I'm a big believer in
I agree.
democracy vouchers, by the way. I don't know if you're familiar with it in Seattle.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
you know,
That's where people get money to donate to candidates.
exactly.
Yeah.
That would
Cool.
make. I mean, we've seen NYCHA be abandoned by
Yeah.
government. NYCHA is, it's 500,000 people. It's like a city.
I know.
They've abandoned it. If those folks were able to contribute, money, they had vouchers, things would be a little different. But listen,
Yeah.
I really admire your activism and the things
Thank you.
you achieved. And I hope that Zorian uses your activism and ideas to make the city more affordable. But
Thank you
Thank you for coming on, and I appreciate the discussion. I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan. Take care.